The gender pay gap very much in the news. Tomorrow is the deadline for big companies, those with more than 250 employees, to reveal the difference in hourly rate paid to men and women in their employment. It's before midnight tomorrow night. On Friday, the public sector faces their deadline. So far, you could say on the face of it, it doesn't look very good. Women on average are earning a lot less than men on average. But are these figures really meaningful? Well, let's talk about this with Kate Andrews, news editor at the Institute of Economic Affairs, who's just published a report on this, and Harriet Minter, who's presenter of the Badass Women's Hour, Saturday evening, 7 till 10 on Talk Radio. Kate Andrews, let me just ask you first. You just published a report from the Institute of Economic Affairs about this gender pay gap. The hashtag now online is pay, instead of just Me Too, it's Pay Me Too. You've been arguing with the Labour MP Stella Creasy about this over the weekend in a rather lively debate on Sky News, I noticed. But are we learning anything from these gender pay gap revelations?
No, we're not. Most of the data being gleaned is essentially meaningless because it hasn't compared men and women doing like-for-like jobs, who are the same age, who have the same background, who have the same education, who have taken the same amount of time out of the workforce. So it really doesn't tell us anything meaningful about whether or not men and women are being compensated fairly and appropriately for the work that they're doing. You might as well say that it's a pay gap between senior managers and junior managers. You might as well say that it's a pay gap between bosses and the communications officer. It's not particularly obvious that gender is the reason that people are being paid differently. And I think it's deeply concerning because all of the reporting right now is that women are getting paid X percentage less than men, 20% X in this, 20% less in this company, 70% less in this company. But that just isn't a true reflection of what's actually going on.
Harriet Minter, do you think we're going to be learning anything about this? Kate Andrews says, well, it's basically meaningless. We've no idea whether these differences are because one person's got fallopian tubes and one person hasn't. So what are we learning?
I think what we're learning is where women sit in the hierarchy at work. We're learning how we pay female-dominated professions, and we're also learning why it is that even sort of 25 odd years after we've had this discussion about getting equal numbers of men and women out through university and in at the same levels, they're not progressing through companies at the same levels.
But maybe they don't want to progress. I mean, maybe, just maybe, it is the case that if you look at a lot of these figures, especially in these big companies, these big city banks that everyone's paying attention to, people seem to be spending less time worrying about, smaller sort of, retailers. They're very obsessed with the big banks, the HSBCs and the like. You've got an awful lot of men who are at the top level, sitting on the board, or the directors earning these telephone number salaries. And at the bottom end, you've got the cleaners, you've got the canteen staff, you've got the secretaries who tend to be more likely to be women. Now, is there anything stopping women from being at the top? And is there anything stopping men from being in the lower paid jobs? That's the key thing, isn't it?
Yes, and we absolutely know that there is. So, for example, one of the key problems we know when it comes to recruiting and promoting people is that people tend to promote and recruit people like them. So if you have a structure which is all men at the top, they are more likely to hire men into senior roles. I'm not saying they're doing it because they're evil, sexist people, just simply because our human nature says we tend to hire people who are like us.
But even if we allow for that, I can completely understand looking at, for instance, if you've got a top echelon at a company and they're all men, and then below that, the next row down, you've got maybe a third women, and below that, you've got half women. Or I can understand, but this isn't what these figures are comparing. They are comparing the chief executive, the finance director, with the cleaner and the guy on security. Realistically, that's not a meaningful comparison, is it?
They're not. So when you look at what the the gender pay gap reporting has asked companies to do, it's asked them to break it down into quartiles. So the top quartile, top middle, bottom quartile. So you can actually see the disparity across various levels. Also, those companies that are really keen on this have actually started doing like-for-like reporting. So looking at what their gender pay gap is for people doing the same job. And even in those companies, they are seeing, albeit smaller, a gender pay gap.
Kate Andrews, Harriet says, look, when you do actually compare like-for-like, there is a gender pay gap still. Even if it's not 60%, maybe it's only 2% or 5%, but there is still a gender pay gap.
Well, I'm glad Harriet's just brought up the quartiles. This is one of the most problematic parts about the measuring, is that it breaks down quartiles, but it doesn't break down age, right? So it doesn't tell you if all the women in the lower pay quartiles are actually a result of the fact that more women are now graduating from university, skilled and ready for the workforce, and are employers hiring them en masse. There's actually some good evidence that this is the case. If you look at companies like EasyJet or Phase 8, the reason they have such a large pay gap is primarily because they hire mass numbers of women into their largest internal job sector, which tends to be in things like retail and cabin crew. So the quartiles, again, don't tell us anything about gender discrimination because it very well could be based on age. That has not been controlled for. Let's look at the actual incentives that are being perpetuated here as well. If employers think it is bad to report that they have lots of women in their lower pay quartiles, then the incentive there is not actually just to hire more women at the top, it's to hire fewer women at the bottom, if that's just considered to be an outright bad thing. This is so problematic for young women graduating university, for women who are trying to get back into the workforce, maybe looking for some part-time work because they want to have a healthier family and work balance in life. And it is true that some of these companies are publishing their own breakdown of their gender pay gaps, comparing more like for like, but most of what I've seen out there, particularly from these larger companies that get, badly accused of discrimination, is that they are very certain that there is no unequal pay for equal work. If they do compare jobs like for like, they are finding that there isn't a proper gender pay gap. And of course, that information isn't being reported officially. That isn't what the headlines are saying because it's all based on the government's pay gap reporting measures. But that information is out there. That's true. And I would encourage people to look it up, especially women working at these companies, because they're being sold a bit of a dud right now with these headline figures.
This is the thing, Harriet, isn't it? Look, there's a lot of talk about, the need to compare like with like. Exactly. Have you got two people of the same age, same experience, in exactly the same job? And often that's quite difficult to make that comparison. But a lot of the time, the talk about gender pay gap is about equal work of equal value, equal pay for work of equal value. So you say, for instance, people say, well, dinner ladies are paid a lower hourly rate than, for instance, bin men. And we're told, well, this is because they're women and we don't value work by women. I would just say we just think that getting up at 3 a.m. and being out in the cold and the rain, going through people's rubbish is not quite as nice a job as working in a school canteen, and therefore it gets paid more. Are we losing any real meaning when we talk about equal value work?
I don't think we are, because I think we can pick and choose the jobs that we say. So we can say, oh, well, it's 3 a.m., getting up at 3 a.m. to go and empty bins is a terrible job, and ignore the fact that then actually, you're finishing relatively early, you've got the rest of the day. For me, I would rather be up at 3 a.m. emptying bins and dealing with 500 screaming hungry
you
children.
may be, but the statistics would suggest there are more women who want to do that dinner lady job. That's the reason why you have to pay more to get people to be bin men.
You think there are more women that want to do the dinner lady job because we call it a dinner lady?
Well, no, Harriet, I'm going to break this to you. There are an awful lot of women who do that work because it's perfect if you are a mum of young children, because you're able to take your kids to school, be at work, and then get your kids up from school. That's why a lot of women do that job.
But
women who like being around their kids. I know it's madness, but it'll catch on one day.
Care for my children. Why is it only women that are? Why do we only ever talk about women caring for the children? Why do we not give men that opportunity too?
Harriet, I'm always fascinated by the number of women who make this argument who aren't mums. Because you know why? Because
of course.
No, but true.
I can't know anything about it.
I can assure you, I'm a feminist through and through, woman. But trust me, I mean, my biological need to be with my child is so much different from that of my husband, who's a totally devoted father. And I don't know any man or woman who's a parent who doesn't think that. Kate Andrews, just coming back to you on the gender pay gap issue. This is about holding employers to account. I mean, whether it's public sector by the end of the week, private sector by the end of tomorrow night. Do you think anything's going to change as a result of this?
Well, I'm actually concerned about the ways that it might change. As I said before, the incentives here might actually end up to be hiring fewer women into the kinds of jobs that many of them, especially at the graduate level, will apply for. So I'm deeply concerned about the kinds of changes we could see. But the truth of the matter is that for some companies, there's always going to be a gender pay gap in favor of women, and for some, there's probably going to be one in favor of men. To pursue a 0% gender pay gap is to try to centrally plan the economy to the extent that even Jeremy Corbyn couldn't think up in his wildest wildest dreams. It's always going to fluctuate. That's not going to be totally possible. But I am a bit concerned. And if I may, just to come back really quickly on the childcare point, I think I'm somewhere in between the two of you in the sense that I personally would love to see more men voluntarily take up shared parental leave. I think that'd be a great thing. That is
Well, no, if it's what those men want to do, it would be a great thing.
Well, exactly, voluntarily. Exactly. I'm not trying to force this on anyone. But, I think if I ever do have the opportunity to get married one day, that's something I'd want to think about really seriously with my partner because it's something I would value them doing. But I think the point here is that it has to be voluntary. It has to be right for all couples. And the government should be putting in legislation, which it has, to make sure people can do what they want to do. And otherwise, let's try to stay out of it.
Okay, Harriet Minter, just final very briefly, because we're running late for the news, but what do you think is going to come out of these gender pay gap figures becoming out?
What I hope is that we'll realise that the only way we're going to fix it is by promoting more women and working with women to help them understand what they need to stay in the workforce longer.
Harriet, thank you very much. Harriet Minter presented the Badass Women's Hour. It's every Saturday night. It's a brilliant show from 7 till 10 here on Talk Radio. And Kate Andrews, news editor at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Thank you very much, ladies.